There's something powerful about watching a man who's been underestimated his whole life finally get his moment. We've all felt invisible, judged by how we look rather than who we are inside. In the frontier town of Copper Ridge, a weathered mountain man named Ezra Cole rides in on a tired mule, his clothes worn and his beard tangled with dust. When he mentions speaking 12 languages, the wealthy rancher Vincent Hartwell laughs right in his face. But Ezra spent 30 years learning from traders, trappers, and tribal elders across the wildest frontiers. What happens next will turn the whole town upside down. How did this simple mountain man outsmart the richest rancher in 3 territories? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The year was 1883, and Copper Ridge sat nestled in a valley where the Montana Territory stretched out in all directions, like a promise that could break your heart as easily as it could make your fortune. The town itself wasn't much to speak of, a main street of packed dirt that turned to mud with the first rain, wooden boardwalks that creaked under boot heels, and maybe 24 buildings that served the ranchers, miners, and drifters who passed through. But what Copper Ridge lacked in size, it made up for in the iron grip of one man's ambition. Vincent Hartwell owned the largest ranch in 3 territories. His land stretched from the eastern ridge, where the sun rose over pine-covered mountains, all the way west to the alkaline flats, where nothing grew but sagebrush and regret. 15,000 acres of prime grazing land, watered by Silver Creek, the only reliable water source for 50 miles in any direction. Hartwell didn't just own the land. He owned the water rights, or so everyone believed. And in that part of the world, water meant everything. It meant life or death for cattle. It meant whether a man could start a ranch or watch his dreams dry up like a puddle in August. Hartwell's ranch house sat on a hill overlooking the town like a king surveying his domain. It was a 2-story monument to wealth, built with timber hauled in from Oregon and fitted with glass windows that caught the sunlight and threw it back like a challenge. The man himself was 52 years old, broad-shouldered and thick through the middle, with a silver mustache he waxed to sharp points and eyes the color of creek ice. He wore tailored suits even in the dust and heat, and he carried himself with the certainty of a man who had never been told no and wouldn't recognize the word if he heard it. The town bent to Hartwell's will because it had no choice. He controlled the water, which meant he controlled who could ranch and who couldn't. He set the prices at the only cattle auction within 100 miles. He owned the bank, which meant he decided who got loans and who lost their land when times got hard. And times were always hard for everyone, except Vincent Hartwell. The general store stood at the center of town, a weathered building with a false front that made it look bigger than it was. Sarah Mitchell ran the place, and had for the past 3 years since her husband died. She was 47, with silver threading through her dark hair and lines around her eyes that came from squinting into too many harsh sunsets. She had a quiet strength about her, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. She'd seen hard times, losing her husband to a mining accident, raising 2 boys who were now grown and gone to seek their fortunes in California, but she'd never let bitterness take root. Sarah kept the store clean and organized, the shelves stocked with everything from flour and coffee to lamp oil and ammunition. She extended credit when people needed it, within reason, and she had a memory for faces and stories that made folks feel seen. In a town dominated by Hartwell's cold calculation, Sarah's store was a warm place where people could speak freely, at least in whispers. Tom Brennan worked the forge at the east end of town. He was a big man, 60 years old, with arms like tree trunks and hands scarred from decades of working hot metal. His beard was more white than grey now, and his back didn't straighten quite as easy as it used to, but he could still shape horseshoes and repair wagon wheels better than any man in the territory. Tom had come west after the war, looking for a place where the past didn't follow quite so close. He'd found Copper Ridge when it was just a trading post and 3 buildings. And he'd watched it grow, watched Hartwell's shadow grow longer over all of it. Tom didn't talk much about politics or take sides in public disputes, but those who knew him understood that his silence wasn't agreement. He helped people when he could, asked fair prices for his work, and kept his opinions to himself unless directly asked. He had a fondness for Sarah Mitchell, though neither of them had ever spoken of it aloud. Some things didn't need words. Miguel Rodriguez tended the stables behind the hotel, a young man of 23 with quick hands and a quicker mind. He'd come north from Texas with his family 5 years back, looking for work and a chance at something better. His father had died the first winter. Pneumonia took him fast, and Miguel became the man of the family overnight. He supported his mother and 2 younger sisters with his wages from the stable, and he did it without complaint. He had his father's dark eyes and his mother's gentle heart, and he'd learned early that keeping his head down was the safest way to navigate Hartwell's world. But Miguel noticed things. He saw how Hartwell treated the Mexican and Chinese workers who came through, saw the short wages, the contempt, the casual cruelty. He'd learned to speak English without an accent, because Hartwell paid more for civilized help. But it galled him to hide his heritage like it was something shameful. Still, his mother and sisters needed to eat, so Miguel smiled when he had to and swallowed his pride daily. Into this carefully balanced world rode Ezra Cole on a Tuesday morning in late September. The first thing people noticed was the mule, a sturdy gray animal with intelligent eyes and the patient manner of a creature that had seen more country than most men ever would. The second thing they noticed was the man himself. Ezra looked to be somewhere north of 50, though it was hard to tell with certainty. The sun and wind had carved deep lines into his face, and his beard grew thick and untamed, shot through with white and gray. He wore buckskin pants that had been patched and repatched, a wool shirt that had faded from red to rust, and a leather coat that looked older than some of the buildings in town. But his eyes were clear and sharp, and light brown that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He sat straight in his saddle, despite the obvious weariness of long travel, and he moved with the economical grace of a man who'd learned not to waste energy on unnecessary motion. Strapped behind his saddle were bundles of furs, beaver, fox, and marten, and a worn leather satchel that bulged with unknown contents. Ezra guided his mule down Main Street at an easy walk, nodding politely to the few people who looked up from their business. Most folks gave him a curious glance and then looked away. Drifters and trappers came through Copper Ridge regular enough. This one looked no different from a dozen others, rough, poor, and unlikely to stay long. He stopped at the general store, tied his mule to the rail with a practiced knot, and stepped up onto the boardwalk. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and a small bell announced his arrival. Sarah looked up from behind the counter where she'd been tallying her ledger. She took in the stranger with a quick assessing glance, not unfriendly, but careful. A woman running a business alone learned to read men fast. "Morning," Ezra said. His voice was quiet, roughened by weather and solitude, but there was courtesy in it. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Sarah replied. She set down her pencil. "What can I do for you?" Ezra approached the counter and carefully removed his hat. His hair beneath was thick and gray, pressed flat from the hat's weight. "Need to trade some furs if you're buying, and I could use some supplies, coffee, salt, dried beans if you have them. Ammunition for a Henry rifle." Sarah came around the counter to examine the furs. Ezra untied the bundles and spread them out with care, handling each pelt like it mattered. They were good furs, well cured and clean. Sarah knew quality when she saw it. "These are fine," she said, running her hand over a beaver pelt. "You do the curing yourself?" "Yes, ma'am. Learned from a French trapper up in the Canadian territories. He taught me the old ways, takes longer, but the leather stays supple." They negotiated a fair price, neither trying to cheat the other, and settled on a trade that left Ezra with store credit and Sarah with valuable merchandise she could sell to the traders who came through. As Sarah gathered his supplies, Ezra's gaze drifted around the store, taking in the careful organization, the cleanliness, the small touches that spoke of pride in the work. "You've built something good here," he said. Sarah paused, surprised by the observation. Most men didn't notice such things, or if they did, they didn't speak of it. Thank you. I try to keep it welcoming. A store should be more than just a place to buy flour. My wife used to say the same thing, Ezra said quietly. She ran a trading post for a while, long time back. Said every store had a spirit to it, either warm or cold, depending on who ran it. Used to? Sarah asked gently. She passed. 15 years now. Fever took her fast. Ezra's voice stayed level, but there was old grief in it, the kind that had been carried so long it became part of a man's weight. I'm sorry, Sarah said, and meant it. She understood that particular loneliness. They finished the transaction in companionable silence. As Ezra gathered his supplies, the door opened again and Miguel stepped in, his hat in his hands. Senora Mitchell, He stopped when he saw Ezra. Pardon me. I didn't mean to interrupt. No interruption, Sarah assured him. What do you need, Miguel? Just wanted to let you know that wagon wheel you asked about. Tom says he'll have it ready by Thursday. Thank you. Miguel, Sarah smiled at him warmly. Ezra had turned at the sound of Miguel's voice, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or interest. You're from Texas? He asked Miguel in Spanish, the words flowing naturally. Miguel's eyes widened in surprise. He answered in Spanish, his voice suddenly more animated. Yes, sir. Near San Antonio? How did you know? Your accent, Ezra replied, still in Spanish. It carries the music of that region. I spent time there years ago. Beautiful country. They spoke for a few more moments in Spanish, and Sarah watched with growing interest. The mountain man's Spanish was flawless, easy as breathing, and Miguel's whole demeanor had changed. His shoulders had relaxed, his smile had widened. It was like watching someone step out of a shadow. When Miguel left, promising to return later, Ezra switched back to English. Good young man, he said to Sarah, carries a lot on his shoulders. He does, Sarah agreed. His whole family depends on him. Ezra nodded, understanding implicit in the gesture. He paid for his supplies, thanked Sarah for her fairness, and turned to leave. But Sarah found herself curious about this quiet man who spoke Spanish like a native, and noticed the things most folks overlooked. Will you be staying in town long? She asked. Ezra paused at the door. A few days, maybe. Need to rest my mule and resupply before heading back to the high country. Winter comes early up there. The hotel has clean rooms if you need one. Or Tom Brennan at the forge sometimes rents his back room to travelers. Might take him up on that. Thank you for the kindness, ma'am. Sarah, she corrected gently. And you're welcome. Ezra Cole, he said, offering his name like a fair trade. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Sarah stood in the quiet store, thinking about the weathered mountain man with the careful manners and the flawless Spanish. Something about him felt different from the usual drifters, something solid and true. She found herself hoping he'd stay a few days. The town could use more men like that, she thought. Men who noticed things. Men who spoke with courtesy and carried grief without letting it turn them mean. Outside, Ezra led his mule down the street toward the forge, where smoke rose from Tom's chimney in a steady grey column. The afternoon sun was warm on his shoulders, and for the first time in months of solitary travel, he felt something like welcome. He didn't know yet that Vincent Hartwell had been watching from his office window above the bank. Didn't know that his arrival had been noted and assessed and filed away in the rancher's calculating mind. Didn't know that in 48 hours, his quiet life would be turned upside down by a single careless conversation and a wealthy man's pride. For now, there was just the dusty street, the sound of Tom's hammer on the anvil, and the simple comfort of being among people again. Sometimes that was enough. Ezra spent his first day in Copper Ridge quietly, renting Tom's back room and settling in for what he thought would be a peaceful few days of rest. He helped Tom repair a broken wagon axle, his hands still skilled with tools, despite the years of mountain living. Tom appreciated the help and the easy silence between them, the comfortable quiet of two men who didn't need to fill every moment with words. On the second evening, Tom invited Ezra to join him at the Silver Creek Saloon for supper. It wasn't fancy, but the food was honest, and the whiskey wasn't watered down too much. They sat at a corner table eating beef stew and bread, when Vincent Hartwell walked in with 3 of his ranch hands. The room shifted when Hartwell entered. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Men straightened in their chairs or found sudden interest in their drinks. The rancher commanded space without asking for it, his tailored vest and polished boots marking him as a man apart from the dust and sweat of common labor. Hartwell made his way to the bar, ordered whiskey, and surveyed the room with the casual authority of ownership. His eyes landed on Ezra and Tom, lingered for a moment on the stranger, then moved on. But something pulled his attention back, perhaps the worn leather satchel resting against Ezra's chair, or the way the mountain man sat with the relaxed awareness of someone accustomed to watching his surroundings. "Tom," Hartwell called across the room, his voice carrying easily. "Who's your friend?" Tom set down his spoon carefully. "Ezra Cole. He's passing through, doing some trading." Hartwell walked over, his boots loud on the wooden floor. His ranch hands followed at a respectful distance. "Cole," he said, not offering his hand. "Vincent Hartwell. I own the Hartwell Ranch, largest spread in the territory." "Pleasure," Ezra said simply, meeting the man's eyes without challenge or submission. "You're a trapper?" Hartwell's gaze swept over Ezra's worn clothing with barely concealed disdain. "I do some trapping, some hunting, whatever the season requires. Hard way to make a living." Hartwell sipped his whiskey. "Man works his whole life in the mountains and has nothing to show for it but worn-out clothes and tired bones." Ezra smiled slightly. "I've got a roof over my head when I need one and food in my belly. That's more than some can say." "Indeed." Hartwell's attention shifted to the leather satchel. "What's that you're carrying? Looks like it's been halfway around the world. Just personal items. Nothing of interest." But Hartwell had already spotted something, the carved stem of the peace pipe protruding slightly from the bag's opening. His eyes lit with the acquisitive gleam of a collector spotting treasure. "Is that a genuine Cheyenne pipe?" Ezra's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "It is. May I see it?" There was no polite way to refuse without causing offense, so Ezra carefully withdrew the pipe. It was beautiful, carved from red pipestone, with intricate designs along the stem, decorated with beadwork and eagle feathers. The craftsmanship spoke of hours of careful work and deep cultural significance. Hartwell reached for it, but Ezra didn't release it into his hands. Instead, he held it up for viewing while keeping his own grip secure. "It's a sacred object," Ezra said quietly, "given to me by a Cheyenne elder. It's not meant for casual handling." "I collect Indian artifacts," Hartwell said, his voice taking on an edge. "I have quite a collection, pottery, weapons, ceremonial items. I'd pay you well for that pipe. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price." Hartwell named a figure that would have been a year's wages for most men in the room. "No, sir. Some things aren't about money." The refusal hung in the air like a slap. Men didn't tell Vincent Hartwell no, not in his town. The rancher's jaw tightened, and something cold moved behind his eyes. "Sentimental about Indian trinkets," Hartwell said, his voice dripping with condescension. "That's quaint. Tell me, Cole, you spend much time with the savages?" Ezra's voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath now. "I've spent time with the Cheyenne, the Lakota, the Crow, and others. They're people, same as anyone. Some good, some bad, all trying to survive in a world that keeps taking from them. How noble." Hartwell turned to address the room, playing to his audience now. "We have a philosopher among us, gentlemen. A mountain man who defends the red man." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the saloon. Most men kept their eyes down, not wanting to be pulled into the confrontation. "The Cheyenne elder who gave me that pipe," Ezra said carefully, "was named Two Hawks. He taught me his language over the course of 3 winters. He shared his people's wisdom about living with the land instead of against it. When he gave me that pipe, he said it was because I'd learned to listen, really listen to what people were saying. Not just with words, but with their hearts." "Their language," Hartwell repeated, seizing on the phrase like a cat on a mouse. "You speak Cheyenne, do you?" "I do. Just Cheyenne, or are you a scholar of savage tongues?" Ezra recognized the trap being set, but saw no way around the truth. "I speak 12 languages, Mr. Hartwell. I've been fortunate to learn from many people over the years." The saloon went silent. Then Hartwell laughed, a big booming sound that filled the room and invited others to join him. Several men did, nervously at first, then with more confidence when they saw the rancher's mirth. 12 languages! Hartwell slapped his thigh. "Did you hear that, boys? This fellow in his ragged buckskins claims to speak 12 languages. What languages would those be, Cole? Do tell." Ezra felt the room's attention pressing on him like a physical weight. He could walk away, let Hartwell have his laugh. Pride wasn't worth trouble, but something in the man's casual cruelty, the way he'd called the Cheyenne savages, the way he was using Ezra's truthful answer as entertainment, sparked a quiet anger. English, Spanish, French, German, Russian, Mandarin, Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, Portuguese, Italian, Cheyenne, and Lakota, Ezra said evenly. "I learned them over 30 years of traveling and working with people who spoke them." The laughter grew louder. Hartwell's face was red with amusement. "A mountain man who speaks Chinese, Russian. My dear fellow, you must think us all fools. I've met educated men, real scholars who studied at universities, who barely manage French. But you, a dirty trapper, expect us to believe you speak a dozen languages." "I don't expect anything," Ezra said. "You asked, and I answered honestly. Honest." Hartwell turned to his audience again. "He's honest. Well then, let's test this honesty. I'll make you a wager, Cole. If you can genuinely prove, that you speak even half of those languages, I'll give you my prize stallion, Black Thunder. He's worth more than you'll earn in 5 years of trapping." The room buzzed with interest. Black Thunder was legendary, a magnificent black horse that Hartwell had imported from Kentucky at enormous expense. "And if I can't prove it?" Ezra asked, though he already knew. "Then you leave Copper Ridge tonight and never come back. We don't need liars and braggarts cluttering up our town." Hartwell's smile was sharp. "Do we have a wager?" Ezra looked at Tom, who shook his head slightly, a warning. He looked at the other faces around the room, some curious, some pitying, some already convinced he was a fool or a liar. He thought about walking away, letting Hartwell's laughter follow him into the night. But then he thought about 2 hawks who had trusted him with sacred knowledge. He thought about all the people who had taught him their languages, shared their cultures, treated him with dignity when he had nothing to offer but his willingness to learn. Those relationships weren't trinkets or tall tales. They were the most valuable things he owned. "We have a wager," Ezra said quietly. Hartwell's grin widened. "Excellent! We'll settle this properly. Tomorrow afternoon, my ranch. I'll invite some of the territory's most educated men to witness your performance. I'm sure they'll be fascinated to hear a mountain man demonstrate his linguistic prowess." The sarcasm dripped like poison. "Tomorrow afternoon," Ezra agreed. Hartwell and his men left the saloon in high spirits, already spreading word of the entertainment to come. When they were gone, the room slowly returned to normal volume, though every eye kept drifting to Ezra. Tom leaned close. "You shouldn't have taken that bet." "Probably not. Can you actually speak all those languages?" Ezra was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Yes, but proving it to Hartwell's satisfaction, that's a different matter. A man like that doesn't want to be proven wrong. He'll find a way to twist things no matter what I show him. Then why agree? Because some things are worth standing up for, even when the odds are poor." Ezra looked down at the peace pipe, now safely back in his satchel. "2 hawks told me that a man who hides his truth to avoid mockery loses something more valuable than pride. He loses himself." Tom studied his friend's weathered face. "There's more to you than meets the eye, isn't there?" "I'm just a man who's lived a long time and paid attention," Ezra said. "That's all any of us can do, pay attention and try to learn something from every person we meet." But as they finished their supper in contemplative silence, both men knew that tomorrow would change everything. The bet was set, the town was buzzing with gossip, and Vincent Hartwell's pride was now invested in proving Ezra Cole a liar. The only question was, what would happen when Ezra proved him wrong? News of the wager spread through Copper Ridge like wildfire through dry grass. By sunrise, Everyone in town knew that the Mountain Man had claimed to speak 12 languages and that Vincent Hartwell had called his bluff. Opinion divided sharply. Most folks sided with Hartwell. After all, the idea of an uneducated trapper speaking a dozen languages seemed preposterous. A few, like Sarah and Tom, reserved judgment and hoped quietly that Ezra knew what he was doing. Ezra spent the morning in his rented room, going through his belongings with deliberate care. The leather satchel held more than most people would have guessed, not just the peace pipe, but documents, letters, small tokens from 3 decades of wandering. Each item carried a memory, a connection to someone who had mattered. He found the old ledger near the bottom of the satchel, its leather cover worn smooth by handling. The pages inside were filled with neat Cyrillic script, records of fur trades conducted in Russian territories, prices and quantities, dates and signatures. He'd kept it as a memento of his time in Alaska and the Russian Far East, never imagining it might serve as evidence one day. Around noon, Sarah appeared at Tom's forge with a basket of food. She found Ezra sitting on a stump outside the workshop, cleaning his boots, a small act of dignity before the afternoon's trial. "Brought you some lunch," she said. "Figured you might need fortification." "That's kind of you." Ezra accepted the basket gratefully. Inside was fresh bread, cheese, dried apples, and a jar of cold water. "More kindness than I deserve, troubling your town the way I have." "You didn't start this trouble," Sarah said firmly. "Vincent Hartwell did, same as he starts most trouble around here. He can't stand the thought that someone might know something he doesn't. He's a powerful man. I should have walked away, maybe, but you didn't, and now the whole town's curious to see what happens." Sarah sat down on another stump, smoothing her skirt. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you really speak all those languages?" Ezra bit into the bread, chewing thoughtfully before answering. "I do. I know it sounds impossible, but it's what happens when you spend 30 years moving around and actually listening to people. I was never good with books, never had much formal schooling, but languages, they came natural to me. Like music comes natural to some folks. How did you learn them all?" "Same way a child learns. By living with the people who spoke them, making mistakes, asking questions, paying attention. I worked for a French fur trading company for 3 years. That's how I learned French. Spent 2 winters with a Russian trapper in Alaska. That's where the Russian came from. The Chinese I learned in San Francisco, working on the docks and in the trading houses. Each language opened doors to new people, new ways of thinking." Sarah studied him with open curiosity. "What made you want to learn them?" "Loneliness at first," Ezra admitted. "I was young and far from home, and I realized that if I wanted real conversation, real connection, I needed to speak the language of whoever was around me. But then it became something more. Each language carries a whole world inside it. Learning someone's language is like being invited into their home. It's an honor. That's a beautiful way to think about it. It's the truth." Ezra took a drink of water. "People think language is just words, but it's not. It's how a culture sees the world. The Cheyenne don't have a word for ownership the way we do. Their words are about stewardship, about being responsible for something temporarily. The Chinese have dozens of words for different kinds of relationships. There's a specific word for your father's older brother that's different from his younger brother. Every language teaches you something about what matters to the people who speak it." Miguel appeared around the corner of the forge, his hat in his hands. "Senor Cole?" "They're saying it's time. Mr. Hartwell has gathered people at his ranch." Ezra stood, brushing crumbs from his pants. "Thank you." "Miguel, I hope—" the young man started, then stopped, unsure if he should speak. "Go ahead," Ezra encouraged. "I hope you show him," Miguel said quietly, intensity burning in his dark eyes. "Mr. Hartwell treats people like me, like we're less than human because we speak different. Maybe if you show him, maybe he'll learn something." Ezra put a hand on Miguel's shoulder. "I'll do my best. But men like Hartwell don't learn easy. Their pride is built on feeling superior." The 3 of them, Ezra, Sarah, and Miguel, walked together toward the edge of town where Hartwell's ranch began. Tom joined them from the forge, falling into step beside Ezra without a word. It felt good to have people walking with him, Ezra thought. Whatever happened this afternoon, at least he wouldn't face it entirely alone. Hartwell's ranch yard was crowded with people. Word had spread beyond Copper Ridge, and folks had come from neighboring ranches and settlements to witness the spectacle. The rancher had set up the scene carefully, a table and chairs in front of his grand house, with himself seated like a judge at a tribunal. Beside him sat 3 other men in fine clothes, clearly the educated witnesses he'd mentioned. Ezra approached steadily, his satchel over his shoulder, his worn boots raising small puffs of dust. The crowd parted to let him through, and he heard the whispers following. "Him like a wake behind a boat, that's him, the one who claims to speak 12 languages. Looks like he can barely speak English. Hartwell's going to tear him apart." Ezra reached the table and stood before it, waiting. Hartwell let the silence stretch, enjoying his authority. Finally he spoke. "Mr. Cole, so good of you to join us. These gentlemen beside me are Professor Aldrich from the Territorial College, Judge Morrison, and Mr. Pemberton, who studied languages at Harvard. They've agreed to help verify your remarkable claims." The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to cut. "I appreciate their time," Ezra said simply. "Well then, shall we begin? Perhaps you could start by telling us how an unschooled mountain man came to speak, what was it, 12 languages?" "I learned them the same way most people learn their first language," Ezra replied. "By listening, speaking, making mistakes, and trying again. The difference is, I kept doing it with new languages instead of stopping at one." Professor Aldrich leaned forward, his expression skeptical but not unkind. "That's a nice theory, Mr. Cole. But linguistic acquisition requires certain cognitive abilities and, frankly, opportunities that don't typically present themselves to trappers. With respect, Professor, trappers go places that scholars don't. We trade with people from all over the world. The fur trade brought together Russians, French, British, Chinese, and native peoples. If you wanted to conduct business, you learned languages. Let's test this theory," Hartwell interrupted, clearly tired of preamble. "You claim to speak Russian. I suppose you expect us to simply take your word for it?" "No, sir." Ezra reached into his satchel and withdrew the old ledger. He opened it to a page filled with Cyrillic script and placed it on the table. "This is a trading ledger from 1867. I kept records of fur transactions in Russian territories." "The entries are in Russian." Professor Aldrich picked up the ledger, his eyebrows rising. He studied the pages carefully, then looked at Ezra with new interest. "But this is genuine Cyrillic script. The handwriting is consistent throughout, suggesting a single author. The vocabulary is specific to fur trading. Can you read it?" Judge Morrison asked. "Some," Aldrich admitted. "I studied Russian briefly. This appears to be legitimate." "Appears to be," Hartwell emphasized. "We're supposed to believe he wrote this himself?" "I did," Ezra said. He began to read from the page in Russian, his pronunciation clear and natural. Then he translated, "March 15th, 1867. Traded 20 beaver pelts, grade A, to Dmitry Sokolov for winter supplies and ammunition. The snow that week was deep, and the trails were dangerous. Dmitry warned me about a bear den near the North Creek." Aldrich followed along in the ledger, his finger tracing the Cyrillic letters. His expression shifted from skepticism to genuine surprise. "That's an accurate translation. Mr. Cole, this is quite remarkable." Hartwell's jaw tightened. "So he knows some Russian. That's one language, and we only have his old book as proof. For all we know, someone else wrote that ledger." "The ink fading is consistent with age," Judge Morrison observed, examining the pages. "And look at these entries. They span several years, all in the same hand. It would be quite a sophisticated forgery." A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't going the way Hartwell had expected, and people were starting to notice. Hartwell shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with how quickly the scholarly panel had validated Ezra's Russian. But he recovered fast, leaning back with calculated nonchalance. "Very well. One language confirmed. You claim 12. That leaves 11 more to prove." "I'm ready whenever you are," Ezra said. The crowd had grown silent, anticipation replacing mockery. Even those who'd been ready to laugh were now paying close attention. Something unexpected was happening. and frontier folk had an instinct for when the tables might be turning. Before Hartwell could respond, a commotion arose at the edge of the gathering. A man pushed through the crowd, dark-skinned, wearing the loose robes and turban of a Moroccan merchant. He carried several large bundles and looked travel-weary. "Pardon, please," the merchant said in heavily accented English. "I'm looking for the trading post. I have goods to sell, spices, fabric, metalwork. Someone tell me where I find the merchant here." Sarah stepped forward. "I run the general store. I might be interested in what you have." The merchant's face brightened. "Excellent. I am Rashid Al-Farsi. I travel from New York, bringing goods from my country. You speak French, perhaps?" "My English is not so good." Sarah shook her head apologetically. "I'm sorry, I don't." "Spanish?" Rashid tried hopefully. Again, Sarah shook her head. Rashid's shoulders slumped. It was a familiar frustration for foreign merchants, having valuable goods but lacking the language to negotiate effectively. Ezra stepped forward. "Assalamu alaikum," he said, the Arabic greeting flowing naturally from his lips. Rashid's face transformed with joy and relief. "Wa alaikum assalam. You speak Arabic?" "Allah be praised." What followed was a rapid, fluid conversation in Arabic. Ezra's accent carried the distinct pronunciation of classical Arabic mixed with Moroccan dialect, and Rashid responded with the enthusiasm of a man who'd been trying to conduct business in broken English for weeks. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the mountain man and the Moroccan merchant discussed goods, prices, trade routes, and the quality of various spices. After several minutes, Ezra turned to Sarah. "Rashid has cinnamon, saffron, and black pepper, all high quality. He also has silk fabric and some very fine copper work. He's willing to trade for local goods, especially furs and dried meat. His prices are fair. You can verify the quality?" Sarah asked. Ezra spoke again to Rashid in Arabic, examined the samples the merchant produced, and nodded. "These are genuine. The saffron especially is excellent, probably worth 3 times what he's asking." "Tell him I'm interested," Sarah said. Ezra negotiated the terms in Arabic, switching between Sarah and Rashid, making sure both parties understood and agreed. When they'd settled on a deal, Rashid clasped Ezra's hands gratefully and spoke at length in Arabic. "What did he say?" Judge Morrison asked, genuinely curious now. "He said he's been traveling for 2 months, and this is the first place where someone could speak his language properly. He said it made him feel human again, instead of like a performing animal trying to make himself understood through gestures." Ezra's voice carried an edge. "I know the feeling." Professor Aldrich was scribbling notes. "Mr. Cole, your Arabic is quite sophisticated. That wasn't just basic trading phrases. You were discussing complex topics." "I spent a year in Ottoman territories," Ezra explained. "Worked on a caravan route between Damascus and Istanbul. The merchants taught me Arabic because I was willing to learn, and they appreciated having someone who could bridge communications between different groups." Hartwell had gone very still. His confidence was cracking, and he clearly hadn't anticipated having a convenient Arabic speaker arrive just when he needed one. But he rallied, forcing a dismissive smile. "So that's 2 languages. Still quite a ways from 12. "Actually," a new voice called out, "I'd like to test something, if I may." A small man in his 60s stepped forward from the crowd. He wore simple but clean clothes and had the calloused hands of a farmer. His face bore the weathered look of someone who'd spent a lifetime working in the sun. "Heinrich Müller," the man introduced himself in accented English. "I came from Germany 30 years ago. My English is good now, but I still dream in German." He turned to Ezra. "Sprechen Sie Deutsch?" Ezra smiled. "Ja, ich spreche Deutsch. Ich habe 3 Jahre in der Nähe von München gearbeitet." Heinrich's face lit up, and he launched into rapid German. Ezra responded in kind, and soon they were deep in conversation about Bavaria, the differences between German regions, and Heinrich's memories of his homeland. The fluency was undeniable. This wasn't a man stumbling through memorized phrases, but someone genuinely comfortable in the language. When they finished, Heinrich turned to Hartwell. "This man speaks German like a native, better than my own son, who was born here and barely remembers the old tongue." He shook Ezra's hand warmly. "It does my heart good to speak it again. Miguel pushed forward from where he'd been standing with the crowd. "I can testify too," he said, louder than his usual quiet voice. "Yesterday, Senor Cole spoke with me in Spanish. Not just a few words. Real Spanish, with the proper grammar and even the expressions my grandmother uses. He knew I was from Texas just from my accent." "The boy's right," Tom added. "I heard them." "It wasn't simple trade talk, it was real conversation." Hartwell stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the ground. "This is irregular. The agreement was that I would test him, not that we'd have random verification from whoever happens to be in the crowd." "But, Mr. Hartwell," Judge Morrison said mildly, "surely any verification is legitimate verification. The question is whether Mr. Cole can speak these languages, not who confirms it. I notice," Professor Aldrich added, "that Mr. Cole adjusted his Arabic dialect to match Rashid's Moroccan pronunciation. That's not something you can fake. And his German showed familiarity with Bavarian idioms. These are markers of genuine fluency, not rote memorization." The crowd was buzzing now, conversations breaking out in all directions. The mood had shifted decisively. What had started as entertainment, watching an uppity mountain man get his comeuppance, had become something else. They were witnessing something genuine, something that challenged their assumptions about who could be educated and how knowledge could be acquired. Ezra remained quiet through it all, letting the evidence speak for itself. He'd learned long ago that the more you defended yourself, the less people believed you. Truth didn't need shouting, it just needed space to be seen. Sarah caught Ezra's eye and gave him a small, encouraging nod. Miguel stood straighter, proud to have spoken up. Even Tom, usually so careful about staying neutral, had sided openly with his friend. Hartwell saw his control slipping. The careful stage he'd set, where he played judge and Ezra played fool, was collapsing. The scholarly panel he'd brought to dismiss Ezra's claims was instead confirming them. The crowd he'd expected to laugh was now watching with respect and growing fascination. "We'll take a brief recess," Hartwell announced abruptly. "I need to consult with my colleagues." He gestured for Professor Aldrich, Judge Morrison, and Mr. Pemberton to follow him toward the house. The three men exchanged glances but complied. As they walked away, Ezra heard Professor Aldrich say, "Vincent, the man clearly has legitimate knowledge. I'm not sure what you're hoping to—" Their voices faded as they entered the house. The crowd remained in the yard, speculation running wild. "4 languages so far," someone said. "Maybe he really does know 12. Hartwell's going to lose his prize stallion. Serves him right for being so cocky." Rashid approached Ezra, still beaming. He spoke in Arabic, gesturing expressively. Ezra responded and they both laughed at something. Watching them, Sarah realized that this was what language meant to Ezra, not showing off or proving points, but genuine connection between people who might otherwise never understand each other. She walked over to him. "You're doing well. We'll see," Ezra replied. "Hartwell's not a man who loses gracefully. He'll find a way to complicate things. Let him try. The town's watching now. They're seeing who you really are." "Who am I?" Ezra asked, genuinely curious about her perception. "Someone who's lived a bigger life than most of us can imagine, but stayed humble enough to sleep in a back room and trade furs for coffee. That's rare, Ezra. That's worth something." Before he could respond, Hartwell emerged from the house, his expression set in hard lines. Whatever discussion had happened inside, it clearly hadn't gone his way. But the rancher was nothing if not adaptable. If he couldn't win through mockery, he'd find another approach. The battle was far from over. Hartwell returned to his seat with renewed composure, though his eyes had gone cold. When a man like Vincent Hartwell felt cornered, he became most dangerous. He'd built an empire by knowing when to push and when to pivot, and right now he was pivoting. "Gentlemen, ladies," he addressed the crowd with practiced charm. "It appears Mr. Cole has indeed demonstrated knowledge of several languages. I'm man enough to acknowledge when I've underestimated someone." The words were gracious, but his tone carried an undercurrent of something else. However, the wager was for 12 languages. "We've seen 4, perhaps 5 if we count his English. That leaves 7 more. "I'm ready to continue," Ezra said quietly. "I'm sure you are. But let's be thorough, shall we?" After all, we want to be absolutely certain, Hartwell signaled to one of his ranch hands. Bring them out. The ranch hand disappeared into the barn and returned leading 3 Chinese men in work clothes, their faces weathered from labor. They were railroad workers, Ezra realized, part of the crew building the spur line that would eventually connect Copper Ridge to the main transcontinental route. They looked uncertain and wary, clearly uncomfortable being summoned to Hartwell's ranch. These men work for the railroad, Hartwell announced. They speak no English at all. If you truly speak Chinese, Mr. Cole, you should be able to communicate with them. Unless, of course, your Chinese is as imaginary as I'm beginning to suspect your other languages might be. The challenge was clever and cruel in equal measure. These weren't willing participants like Rashid or Heinrich. They were workers under Hartwell's economic influence, uncertain of why they'd been brought here and what consequences might follow. Ezra approached them slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect, and spoke in Mandarin. Good afternoon. My name is Ezra Cole. Please don't be worried. Mr. Hartwell has asked me to speak with you to demonstrate that I know your language. You're not in any trouble. The 3 men's expressions transformed from wariness to astonishment. The eldest, a man with grey threading his queue, responded in rapid Mandarin. You speak the language of the Middle Kingdom? How is this possible? I lived in San Francisco for several years, Ezra explained, still in Mandarin. I worked on the docks and in the trading houses. My closest friend was a merchant named Chen Wei. He taught me to speak properly, not just the broken pidgin that most foreigners learn. The middle worker, younger and more animated, joined the conversation. You speak very well. Your tones are mostly correct, and you use formal address properly. Where did you learn to write? Chen Wei's daughter Mei Lin taught me. She was educated, knew the classics and poetry. She said if I was going to learn Chinese, I should learn it beautifully, not crudely. Ezra reached into his satchel and withdrew a small jade pendant on a silk cord. The stone was carved with intricate characters and gleamed with the deep green of quality jade. He held it up for the workers to see. The eldest man's eyes widened. May I examine it? Of course. Ezra handed it over. The man studied the characters carefully, then looked at Ezra with new respect. This inscription is from the Analects of Confucius. The superior man understands righteousness. The inferior man understands profit. This is not a common trinket. Such a gift would only be given to someone of education and honor. It was a gift from Mei Lin before I left San Francisco, Ezra said softly. Her father had died, and she was returning to China. She said she wanted me to remember that knowledge without character is meaningless. The younger worker spoke up. Can you write the characters? Hartwell, who had been watching with growing frustration as the conversation proceeded in a language he couldn't understand, interrupted sharply. What are they saying? Professor Aldrich held up a hand. Please, Mr. Hartwell, let this play out. Ezra borrowed a pencil and paper from Judge Morrison. With careful strokes, he wrote several Chinese characters. The workers gathered around, examining his calligraphy with the critical eye of native speakers. The brush strokes are not perfect, the eldest admitted, but the characters are correct and legible. This is genuine knowledge, not imitation. Ezra then spoke to them in Cantonese, switching dialects smoothly. The youngest worker, who was from Canton, laughed with delight and responded in kind. They exchanged a few sentences before Ezra switched back to Mandarin. What did you just do? Professor Aldrich asked, fascinated. I spoke to him in Cantonese. It's a different dialect, different tones entirely. Like the difference between English and Scots Gaelic, except both are still called Chinese. The scholarly panel was clearly impressed. Mr. Pemberton, who had been largely silent until now, leaned forward. Mr. Cole, in my studies at Harvard, we were taught that Chinese was one of the most difficult languages for Western speakers to master. The tonal nature, the characters, it takes years of dedicated study. It does take years, Ezra agreed. I spent 5 years in San Francisco and I still made mistakes. But Chen Wei was patient with me, and his daughter Mei Lin was an excellent teacher. They treated me like family, and you learn faster when people care whether you succeed. The Chinese workers, understanding now what was happening, spoke among themselves briefly. Then the eldest turned to the crowd and in halting English said, "This man speak true. He know our language good. He show respect to our people." It was a simple statement, but it carried weight. These were men who worked brutal hours for low pay, who faced discrimination and violence as a matter of course. For them to vouch for Ezra meant something genuine had passed between them. "There," Ezra said to Hartwell. "Chinese demonstrated. That makes 5 languages verified." Hartwell's jaw was clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. 5, he agreed coldly. Before anyone could say more, a new voice called out from the crowd. "I'll test him next." A small, elderly Japanese man stepped forward. He wore simple clothes but carried himself with quiet dignity. Ezra recognized him. He ran a small laundry service on the edge of town, a business most people ignored or dismissed. "Mr. Tanaka," Ezra greeted him, this time in Japanese. "I didn't know you were here," Tanaka responded in Japanese, and another fluid conversation began. This one was shorter, more formal, with both men bowing at appropriate moments. Japanese required not just different words, but different social protocols, different levels of politeness depending on the relationship between speakers. Ezra navigated these subtleties naturally. When they finished, Tanaka turned to the crowd. "He speaks Japanese correctly. He even uses proper honorifics, which most foreigners never learn." He bowed to Ezra. "You honor my language by speaking it well." "The honor is mine," Ezra replied in English. "You've been kind to me since I arrived, even when others barely noticed I existed." There was a pointed silence at that remark. Many in the crowd had indeed ignored the Japanese laundryman, treating him as invisible labor rather than a person. Ezra's acknowledgement made some people shift uncomfortably. 6 languages, Judge Morrison said, keeping count. Russian, Arabic, German, Spanish, Chinese, and Japanese. "That's already more than most scholars know, Mr. Hartwell." "The wager was for 12, Hartwell insisted stubbornly. "Then let's continue," Ezra said. A Brazilian cattle buyer who'd been observing from the side stepped forward. "I speak Portuguese," he said. "If you know it, we can talk." Ezra switched to Portuguese, and they discussed cattle breeds, grazing conditions, and the differences between Brazilian and American ranching. The conversation flowed naturally, with both men laughing at shared observations about stubborn bulls and difficult terrain. 7, someone in the crowd counted. "He said Italian too," another voice called out. "Is there anyone here who speaks Italian?" An older woman pushed through the crowd. Mrs. Carlotta Rossini, who ran a small boarding house. Her family had emigrated from Italy 20 years ago. She addressed Ezra in rapid Italian, testing him with questions about regions, food, dialect. Ezra responded in kind, even adjusting his accent when she revealed she was from Sicily, switching from standard Italian to incorporate Sicilian phrases. Mrs. Rossini wiped tears from her eyes when they finished. "He speaks like my father spoke," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "With the music of the old country." 8 languages now, 8. The crowd's energy had completely shifted. What had started as skepticism had become amazement, then respect, and now something like wonder. They were witnessing something extraordinary, not just linguistic skill, but a man who had lived multiple lives, crossed countless borders, and emerged with genuine respect for every culture he'd encountered. Even Professor Aldrich was shaking his head in disbelief. "Mr. Cole, this is remarkable. In all my years of study, I've never encountered anyone with such breadth of linguistic knowledge, especially gained through practical experience rather than formal education." "Languages aren't meant to live in books," Ezra said. "They're meant to connect people. Every language I learned opened up a whole community to me, made me less lonely, made the world feel smaller and friendlier." Hartwell stood abruptly. "We need to discuss something," he announced, his voice tight. Privately, he gestured again to Professor Aldrich and Judge Morrison. This time, Mr. Pemberton declined to follow. Instead, remaining in his seat with an expression that suggested he was done playing along with whatever Hartwell had planned. As Hartwell and his two remaining advisors conferred away from the crowd, Sarah made her way to Ezra's side. "You're doing it," she said quietly. "You're actually doing it. The hard part's still coming," Ezra replied. "A man like Hartwell doesn't lose gracefully. He's going to find a way to twist this. Let him try." Everyone here has seen the truth, but Ezra wasn't so sure. He'd lived long enough to know that truth and power didn't always align. And Vincent Hartwell had a lot more power in this town than one traveling mountain man. Hartwell returned from his private conference with a different strategy written across his face. If he couldn't disprove Ezra's linguistic abilities, he'd find another angle. Men like Hartwell always had another angle. "Mr. Cole has indeed demonstrated impressive knowledge," Hartwell began, his tone now conciliatory, almost admiring. "8 languages by my count, more than I would have believed possible. However, I noticed something interesting about the languages he's chosen to demonstrate." He paused, letting the crowd lean in. "They're all civilized tongues," Hartwell continued. "European languages, Asian languages, languages of peoples who have writing, literature, formal education. But Mr. Cole also claimed to speak Cheyenne and Lakota, savage languages. Languages that have no written form, no grammar texts, no way to verify real knowledge from gibberish. Convenient, wouldn't you say?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. A murmur ran through the crowd, some agreeing, some uncertain. Ezra felt anger kindle in his chest, but he kept his voice level. The Cheyenne and Lakota languages are no less valid than English or Chinese. They're complex, sophisticated, and carry the history and wisdom of entire peoples. Calling them savage languages shows ignorance, not knowledge. "Strong words from a man who can't prove what he claims," Hartwell shot back. "There's no one here who speaks Cheyenne or Lakota. You could recite nonsense syllables, and we'd have no way to verify it." "That's where you're wrong." The voice came from the edge of the property, where 3 riders had just arrived. They sat their horses with the easy grace of men born to the saddle, and even from a distance, their identity was clear. Native men, dressed in a mixture of traditional and traded clothes. The speaker was perhaps 40 years old, with long black hair braided with leather cord, and eyes that had seen too much to be easily impressed. Ezra's face lit with genuine pleasure and surprise. "Running Elk!" The rider dismounted and walked forward, his movements deliberate and dignified, despite the crowd's sudden nervous energy. Many of the white settlers had never stood this close to native men outside of tense trading situations or worse. The historical wounds were still fresh, the wars, the massacres, the broken treaties. Fear and guilt twisted together in the watching faces. Running Elk stopped a few feet from Ezra and studied him. Then his stern face broke into a warm smile, and he clasped Ezra's forearm in greeting. "Ghost who listens," he said in Cheyenne. "It has been many seasons since we shared a fire." "Too many seasons," Ezra replied in Cheyenne. "My heart is glad to see you, my friend." They spoke rapidly in Cheyenne, the language flowing with clicks and rhythms entirely foreign to European ears. The conversation went on for several minutes, both men clearly engaged in genuine communication, not performance. They laughed at something. Then Running Elk's expression sobered as Ezra explained the situation. Running Elk turned to address the crowd, switching to careful English. "This man speaks the language of the Tsitsistas, what you call Cheyenne, as well as any who did not grow up with it. He lived 3 winters with our people. He learned our ways, our stories, our prayers. We gave him the name Ghost Who Listens because he could hear the meaning beneath words." "That's one savage's word," Hartwell said, the slur casual and cutting. "Hardly verification." Running Elk's eyes went cold. "I am Running Elk, warrior of the Cheyenne, nephew of Chief Dull Knife. My word is worth more than the word of a man who steals water and cheats his neighbors." The accusation landed like a thunderclap. Hartwell's face flushed dark red. "How dare you?" "I dare because it is true," Running Elk interrupted calmly. "The water you claim comes from land that was promised to my people in the Fort Laramie Treaty. You use paper and guns to take what you want and call it law. Judge Morrison shifted uncomfortably. The legal tangle of land rights, water rights, and treaty rights was something most white settlers preferred not to examine too closely. It was easier to take what they wanted and sleep soundly than to confront the theft their prosperity was built on. "This isn't about water rights," Hartwell said tightly. "This is about verifying Cole's claims." "Then let me verify," Running Elk said. He spoke to Ezra again in Cheyenne, this time clearly testing him. He asked complex questions, used idioms and metaphors, spoke of spiritual concepts that required cultural understanding to translate properly. Ezra responded to each challenge, and the two men beside Running Elk, who had remained silent until now, nodded in confirmation. One of them spoke up in English, his accent thick, but his meaning clear. "He speaks true. He knows the sacred words, the proper ways. Not many white men learn this." Ezra reached into his satchel, which had become a treasure chest of evidence, and withdrew a leather-bound book. This one was different from the Russian ledger. The pages were filled with handwritten notes in English on one side, and what appeared to be phonetic transcriptions on the other, with explanatory notes scattered throughout. "I made this," Ezra said, holding up the book. "A Cheyenne English dictionary. Took me 2 years to compile. Drew Hawks helped me, and so did his wife, Singing Bird. They were patient with me when I made mistakes, and they trusted me with words that outsiders weren't meant to hear." He opened to a page and showed it to Professor Aldrich, who examined it with scholarly interest. "This is remarkable work. The phonetic notations show an understanding of sounds that don't exist in English. The cultural context notes demonstrate real immersion. Mr. Cole, you could publish this. Linguists would find it invaluable. It's not for publishing," Ezra said firmly. "It's a private record. The Cheyenne didn't give me their language so I could sell it to universities. They gave it to me because they trusted me to use it honorably." Running Elk spoke again in Cheyenne, a longer speech this time. His tone was formal, almost ceremonial. When he finished, he translated for the benefit of the crowd. "I said that Ghost who listens is a man of two worlds. He walks in the white man's places, but carries an Indian heart. He learned our language not to use us, but to understand us. When the soldiers came and tried to move our people to bad land, he spoke for us to the soldier chief. His words saved many lives. This is not a man who speaks tongues like a trick. This is a man who speaks them like prayers." The crowd had gone very quiet. This wasn't what they'd expected. Not the native testimony, not the obvious respect between Ezra and Running Elk, not the revelation that the shabby mountain man had interceded with the army on behalf of the Cheyenne. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She'd sensed there was more to Ezra, but this was something profound. A man who'd built bridges across the violent divide between cultures, who'd risked himself for people who weren't his own. "And Lakota?" Hartwell asked weakly, grasping at the last straw. "He claimed Lakota too." One of Running Elk's companions spoke up. "I am Lakota. I speak it with him already. His Lakota is good, though not as strong as his Cheyenne. But he knows it true." Hartwell stood there. His carefully constructed trap collapsed around him. 9 languages verified. 10 if you counted the 2 native tongues separately. 2 more to go, and his prize stallion was slipping away, along with his pride. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Hartwell, I believe we've established that Mr. Cole's claims are substantially verified. We've witnessed 9 distinct languages, all confirmed by native speakers or documented evidence. The man clearly has extraordinary linguistic abilities. The wager was for 12, Hartwell insisted, his voice rising. He's demonstrated 10 at most. He needs 2 more. Actually, Mr. Pemberton spoke up, Mr. Cole has been speaking English this entire time. That's 11. He only needs to demonstrate 1 more language to fulfill his claim." Hartwell's face had gone from red to nearly purple. His hands gripped the edge of the table hard enough to whiten his knuckles. He was a man watching his world shift, feeling control slip away, and he didn't know how to stop it. Ezra, watching him, felt no triumph, only sadness. There was something tragic about a man so invested in being superior that he couldn't recognize genuine worth in others. Hartwell had everything, land, money, power, But he'd built it all on a foundation of contempt, and contempt, Ezra had learned, always collapsed eventually. "One more language," Ezra said quietly. "That's what you need to see?" "Yes," Hartwell hissed. "Then I'll show you." But even as Ezra spoke, he knew the real demonstration wouldn't be about language at all. It would be about everything language represented: connection, understanding, the bridges built between different worlds. And it would force everyone watching to confront some uncomfortable truths about who they were and how they'd been living. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The crowd had been standing for hours, but no one seemed inclined to leave. This had become more than a wager. It had become a moment that would be talked about for years. Ezra was about to speak when another rider approached from town, this one moving with urgency. The man was elderly, perhaps 70, wearing a faded Union Army coat, despite the years that had passed since the war. He rode directly to where Ezra stood, and dismounted with the stiffness of age and old wounds. "I'll be damned," the old soldier said, staring at Ezra with wide eyes. "It really is you." Ezra's face had gone very still. "Major Garrett, colonel now." "Well, retired colonel." "Was promoted after Appomattox." Garrett continued to stare. 20 years I've been looking for you. The army thought you were dead. I thought you were dead." The crowd pressed closer, sensing something significant unfolding. Hartwell looked between Ezra and the old soldier with confusion giving way to suspicion. "Who is this man?" Hartwell demanded. Colonel Garrett turned to him with the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "This man, whoever you think he is, served with distinction in military intelligence during the war. We called him the Voice. He was the best linguistic operative the Union Army had." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. Tom straightened, seeing his friend in an entirely new light. Miguel stepped closer, eager to hear more. "Explain yourself," Judge Morrison said, his legal mind engaging. "What exactly are you claiming, Colonel?" Garrett reached into his coat and withdrew a worn leather document case. From it, he extracted several papers, yellowed with age but still legible. Captain Ezra Cole, commissioned 1862, assigned to the Bureau of Military Intelligence. Fluent in multiple languages, he conducted interrogations of foreign nationals, translated captured documents, and served as liaison with immigrant regiments, German, French, Italian, Spanish-speaking troops. He saved countless lives by intercepting communications and negotiating with foreign observers. He handed the documents to Judge Morrison, who examined them carefully. The judge's eyebrows rose higher with each page he turned. "These are genuine military records," Morrison confirmed, signed by senior officers, including one letter of commendation from, he paused, reading more carefully, from President Lincoln himself. The crowd erupted in exclamations and questions. Even Hartwell looked genuinely shocked. Ezra's shoulders sagged slightly. "I didn't want this known." "Why the hell not?" Garrett demanded. "You were a hero, Cole. The work you did, coordinating communications between different immigrant units, breaking Confederate cipher codes, negotiating with British and French military observers to keep them from supporting the South, you changed the course of the war." "I did my duty," Ezra said quietly. "Same as thousands of others. Don't be modest now. After Gettysburg, when we captured those Confederate dispatches, you translated them from French in under an hour. They revealed Lee's supply lines. That intelligence helped us win the war." Garrett turned to the crowd. "This man spoke to German regiments in German, Polish soldiers in Polish, Irish troops in Gaelic. He made those men feel seen and heard, and they fought harder because of it." Professor Aldrich was furiously scribbling notes. "Mr. Cole, you learned all these languages for military purposes?" "No," Ezra corrected. "I'd already been learning languages before the war. I was working on a merchant ship, traveling to different ports. When the war started, I enlisted as a regular soldier. Someone discovered I could speak German and French, and I got transferred to intelligence work." Colonel Garrett pulled out another document, this one more worn than the others. Folded and unfolded so many times, the creases were nearly transparent. He opened it with reverent care. "This is the letter from Lincoln," he said. written 3 months before his death. It commends Captain Cole for extraordinary service in the preservation of the Union through the unique application of linguistic excellence and cultural understanding. Garrett looked at Ezra with something like wonder. The president himself took time to write this. Ezra's eyes were distant, remembering. He came to our office once, talked to us about the importance of understanding people, not just defeating them. Said after the war ended, we'd need to rebuild bridges, not just burn them. He asked me why I learned languages, and I told him it made the world feel less lonely. He liked that answer. So why disappear? Hartwell asked, his tone still hostile but less certain now. If you were such a hero, why hide in the mountains like a hermit? Garrett's expression darkened. Because there were people who wanted him dead. After the war, there was chaos, political maneuvering, score settling. Cole had translated documents that exposed corruption in the military supply chains. Powerful people were making fortunes selling defective equipment to the army. Cole's translations proved it. When he was ordered to bury the evidence, he refused. I couldn't let soldiers die from bad ammunition and shoddy boots while contractors got rich, Ezra said simply. So I gave the evidence to a congressman I trusted. The scandal broke. Several high-ranking officers were cashiered out, some contractors went to prison. But others with more power and fewer scruples, came after me. 3 attempts on his life, Garrett added, that we knew about. Could have been more. I helped him fake his death and disappear, gave him a new identity, some money, and told him to get as far from Washington as possible. I figured he'd gone west, but I didn't know where. Sarah was crying openly now, understanding flooding through her. This man, who'd been so kind, so humble, had lived an entire lifetime of service and sacrifice. He'd saved countless lives, stood up to corruption, and paid for it with 20 years of exile and loneliness. My wife, Ezra said softly, the one I mentioned who died of fever. That wasn't entirely true. She was killed. They found me in San Francisco, found us. She died protecting me, giving me time to escape. After that, I stayed moving. Never settled anywhere long enough to be found. The crowd was absolutely silent now. Even Hartwell seemed at a loss for words. Running Elk stepped forward and placed his hand on Ezra's shoulder. This is why you learned our languages so well, he said in English, so everyone could hear. You were running, but you were also living. Every place you went, every people you met, you honored them by learning their words. You turned exile into a kind of pilgrimage. I didn't have a choice about running, Ezra replied. But I had a choice about how I ran. I could hide and be bitter, or I could keep learning, keep connecting. The languages, they saved me. Every time I learned a new one, I found new people to care about, new reasons to keep going. Judge Morrison set down the documents with great care. Mr. Cole, Captain Cole, these papers change everything. You're not just a mountain man with a talent for languages. You're a decorated veteran, a presidential commandee, and apparently a man with considerable knowledge of legal matters, given your role in exposing corruption. Which brings us, Colonel Garrett said, reaching into his document case one more time, to another interesting piece of information. Captain Cole, do you still have the land grant that was given to you in 1866? Ezra's expression shifted, surprise mixed with confusion. The California grant? I never thought. It was just a scrap of land. I assumed someone had claimed it by now. Well, it wasn't in California. The Army made an error in the records. Your land grant was actually for property here in Montana Territory. And I've been carrying the corrected deed for 20 years, hoping I'd find you. Garrett pulled out one final document, this one newer, with official seals and signatures. 200 acres with full water rights from Silver Creek, granted in recognition of your military service. The impact of those words hit the crowd like a physical force. Water rights from Silver Creek, the same creek that Vincent Hartwell claimed exclusive control over. The same water that gave him power over every rancher in the valley. Hartwell had gone pale. That's impossible. I have the only water rights to Silver Creek. I've had lawyers verify it. Your lawyers verified the English language deed, Garrett said. But the original land grant was issued in Spanish, from an older Mexican claim that predated U.S. territorial status. And I'm guessing they didn't know to look for that, because the name on the deed wasn't Ezra Cole. It was his military code name, Lavos, the voice. Judge Morrison took the document and began reading, his face growing more serious with each line. This appears genuine. It's an original Spanish land grant from 1842, confirmed and transferred to military ownership, then granted to Captain Cole in 1866. The water rights are clearly specified. "Let me see that," Hartwell demanded, snatching the document from Morrison's hands. He read it frantically, his face going from pale to ashen. The legal language was clear, the seals authentic, the chain of title unbroken. "This means," Professor Aldrich said slowly, working through the implications, "that Mr. Hartwell has been using water he doesn't actually have exclusive rights to." "It means," Ezra said quietly, "that everyone in this valley has had a right to that water all along. They just didn't know it because Hartwell controlled the information." The crowd erupted in angry murmurs. Ranchers who'd been squeezed out, farmers who'd gone under, families who'd lost everything because they couldn't afford Hartwell's water prices, all of them realizing they'd been cheated for years. Hartwell was trembling with rage and fear. His entire empire, built on the monopoly of water rights, was crumbling. "This is fraud. This is a conspiracy. Cole shows up with convenient documents and a convenient military record. The documents are genuine," Colonel Garrett said firmly, "and I can provide testimony under oath about Captain Cole's service. But here's what really matters. This land grant supersedes your claim by 24 years. In territorial law, the older claim wins." Ezra looked at the deed in Hartwell's shaking hands, then up at the rancher's face. There was no triumph in Ezra's expression, only sadness at how far a man could fall when his power was stripped away. "I didn't come here for this," Ezra said. "I came to trade furs and rest my mule. I took your wager because you mocked something that mattered to me. But I never wanted to take anything from you." "Then destroy the deed," Hartwell said desperately. "Tear it up. Walk away. I can't do that. Because it's not just about you and me anymore. It's about all these people you've been exploiting." Ezra gestured to the crowd. "They deserve access to that water. They deserve a fair chance." The 12th language, Ezra suddenly realized, wasn't another spoken tongue. It was the language of law, written in Spanish but speaking to justice itself. He demonstrated 12 languages after all, 11 spoken and 1 written that would change everything. The revelation hung in the evening air like the last light before darkness. The crowd stood in stunned silence, processing what they'd just learned. Vincent Hartwell, the man who'd controlled their lives for so long, was facing ruin. And Ezra Cole, the shabby mountain man they'd barely noticed, held the power to destroy him completely. Judge Morrison took charge with the calm authority of his office. "We need to handle this properly. Colonel Garrett, I'll need to examine all these documents in detail. Mr. Cole, you'll need to file a formal claim with the Territorial Land Office. Mr. Hartwell, I suggest you gather your own documentation. This is a fraud," Hartwell repeated, but his voice had lost its conviction. He looked like a man watching his house burn down, helpless to stop it. "We'll determine that through proper legal channels," Morrison said firmly. "For now, I'm ordering both parties to maintain the status quo. No changes to water usage, no threats, no intimidation. Is that clear?" Both men nodded, though Hartwell's jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. The crowd began to disperse, but in clusters rather than individually. People gathered in small groups, speaking in urgent whispers. The social order they'd accepted for years had just been shaken to its foundation, and they were trying to make sense of the new landscape. Sarah pulled Ezra aside as he was preparing to leave. "You need protection," she said urgently. "Hartwell's not going to let this go. Men like him, when they're cornered, they're dangerous." "I know," Ezra said quietly. "I've dealt with dangerous men before. That was 20 years ago. You're older now, and he's got ranch hands who'll do whatever he asks." She gripped his arm. "Please, stay with Tom tonight." "Don't be alone," Running Elk overheard and approached. "He won't be alone. My brothers and I will camp near the forge. Anyone who wants to reach Ghost who listens will have to come through us first." Ezra started to protest, but Running Elk held up his hand. You spoke for us when we had no voice. Now we speak for you. This is how it works between friends. Gratitude swelled in Ezra's chest. Thank you. Tom joined them, his expression grave. My back room's yours for as long as you need it. And I've got a spare rifle if things get ugly. As they walked back toward town, Ezra, Sarah, Tom, and Miguel, with Running Elk and his companions following at a respectful distance, Ezra felt the weight of what had just happened settling onto his shoulders. He'd spent 20 years avoiding exactly this kind of attention, exactly this kind of conflict. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. What will you do? Sarah asked quietly. With the land grant? I don't know yet. I need to think. Ezra's mind was already working through the implications. The water rights affect everyone. If I claim them solely for myself, I'm no better than Hartwell. But if I just give them away, there's no guarantee they'll be managed fairly. You could form a water collective, Miguel suggested hesitantly. Share the rights among all the ranchers and farmers. Make it democratic. Ezra looked at the young man with new respect. That's a good idea. A very good idea. They reached Tom's forge as full darkness fell. Tom lit lamps while Running Elk and his companions set up their camp just outside, their fire a warm circle of light in the darkness. Inside, Sarah unpacked food she'd brought, bread, cheese, cold chicken, and spread it on Tom's rough table. You should eat, she urged Ezra. You've had a long day. We all have. But Ezra sat and accepted the food gratefully. His hands, he noticed, were shaking slightly. The adrenaline of the confrontation was finally wearing off, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Colonel Garrett arrived an hour later, having taken a room at the hotel. He brought a bottle of decent whiskey and a folder full of additional documents. Thought you might want to see the full military file, he said, pouring drinks for everyone. Now that the secret's out. They spent the next 2 hours going through Ezra's military history. The stories were remarkable. Missions behind Confederate lines, translations that had revealed enemy plans, negotiations with foreign military observers who'd been considering supporting the South. Ezra had been at the center of intelligence work that most people would never know about, doing unglamorous but vital work that had helped win the war. Why did you really disappear? Tom asked at one point. I mean, I understand about the threats, but 20 years is a long time to stay hidden. Ezra was quiet for a moment, staring into his whiskey. After my wife died, something broke inside me. I'd spent the war trying to save lives, trying to make things better. And for what? So the same kind of men who started the war could profit from the peace. So corruption could continue, just wearing a different uniform. He looked up, meeting Tom's eyes. I was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of politics, tired of watching good people suffer while bad people prospered. The mountains offered something I desperately needed. Silence, space, a chance to heal. But you didn't just hide, Sarah said softly. You kept learning, kept connecting with people, because isolation wasn't the answer either. I learned that the hard way, Ezra smiled sadly. The first year alone nearly killed me, not from danger or hardship, but from loneliness. Humans aren't meant to be solitary. We need each other, even when we're hurt, even when we're afraid. So I started seeking out people again. Trappers, traders, native peoples. And I learned that the best way to honor someone is to learn their language. It's like saying, you matter enough for me to make the effort. Miguel spoke up, his voice thoughtful. That's why you learned Spanish with me right away. You were honoring me. You seemed like someone worth knowing. Ezra replied simply. Colonel Garrett set down his glass. I've been thinking about the legal situation. Judge Morrison will need time to verify the documents, probably a few days at minimum. During that time, Hartwell will be working every angle he can find. He's got money and influence. What can he do? Sarah asked. He can try to prove the documents are forgeries. He can claim the land grant was improperly transferred. He can tie things up in territorial court for months or years. And in the meantime, Garrett's expression was grim. In the meantime, he might try more direct solutions. You mean violence, Tom said flatly. I mean that desperate men do desperate things. Hartwell's entire empire depends on those water rights. Without them, he's just another rancher. a wealthy one, but no longer the unquestioned power in the valley. Running Elk entered then, moving silently despite his size. 3 riders approached the forge from the north. They turned back when they saw our fire, but they were Hartwell's men. I recognized the horses. Everyone exchanged glances. It was starting already. "We need a plan," Sarah said firmly. "We can't just sit here waiting for Hartwell to make the first move." "Actually," Ezra said slowly, an idea forming, "maybe we can turn this around. Garrett, you said the documents need to be verified. How long would that really take if we had cooperation from all parties?" "With cooperation? Judge Morrison could probably review everything and make a preliminary ruling in a day or 2. The full legal process would take longer, but an initial judgment would carry weight. Then I need to talk to Hartwell privately, just him and me." "That's insane," Tom protested. "He'll try to kill you or buy you off." "Maybe, but I think there's a third option he hasn't considered yet." Ezra stood, his mind made up. "I'll go to his ranch tomorrow morning, in daylight where everyone can see. I'll make him an offer." "What kind of offer?" Sarah asked warily. "One that gives him a way out without complete destruction. Hartwell's not stupid, he knows he's losing. But if I give him a path to save face and keep some of what he's built, he might take it. And if we can avoid a prolonged legal battle, the whole community benefits. And if he refuses," Miguel asked, "then we go to court and let the law decide. But I want to try the peaceful route first. I've seen enough conflict in my life. I'd rather build bridges than burn them." Colonel Garrett studied him with the keen eye of a man who'd commanded soldiers in battle. "You've changed since the war." The Ezra I knew would have been angrier about this, more willing to see Hartwell destroyed. "The Ezra you knew was younger and hadn't lost as much," Ezra replied. "I've learned that destroying your enemies just creates new ones. But if you can turn an enemy into something else, if not a friend, then at least someone with a stake in peace. Everyone's better off." They talked long into the night, working out details and contingencies. Miguel offered to carry messages between different groups. Sarah volunteered to organize the other ranchers and farmers, make sure they understood what was at stake and had a voice in whatever solution emerged. Tom promised to keep his forge open as neutral ground where people could gather safely. Running Elk and his companions would maintain their protective watch, but discreetly. "We will be shadows," he said, "present but not threatening. White men fear Indians too easily. Better they don't see us unless necessary." Around midnight, Colonel Garrett pulled out one more document from his case. "I almost forgot. This is for you." He handed Ezra an official-looking paper with government seals. "Your discharge papers. Honorable service, full rank restoration. I had them processed years ago, kept them safe in case I found you. You're officially Captain Ezra Cole again, with full military pension owed." Ezra stared at the document, emotions warring on his face. "I don't want to be Captain Cole. That man died with the war. Maybe, but his service didn't. And neither did his right to recognition." Garrett put his hand on Ezra's shoulder. "You don't have to use the rank. But you should have these papers. They prove who you are and what you did. In the legal fight ahead, they matter." When everyone finally settled down to rest, Ezra in Tom's back room, Colonel Garrett returning to the hotel, Sarah to her home above the general store, the night felt heavy with anticipation. Tomorrow would bring the real confrontation, not the public spectacle of the language demonstration, but something more personal and potentially more dangerous. Ezra lay on the narrow bed, listening to the familiar sounds of Running Elk's camp outside, the occasional pop of their fire, the low murmur of conversation in Cheyenne. He thought about all the paths that had led him to this moment. The war, the assassination attempts, his wife's death. 20 years of wandering. Every language he'd learned, every person he'd connected with, had been preparing him for something. He just hadn't known what. Now he did. This wasn't about water rights or property or winning a wager. It was about using everything he'd learned, about language, about people, about negotiation and understanding, to create something better than what had existed before. To take a situation built on exploitation and transform it into something approaching fairness. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, but Ezra had done impossible things before. He finally drifted to sleep with a plan forming in his mind, a speech taking shape in multiple languages. Tomorrow, he would talk to Vincent Hartwell not as an enemy, but as one human being to another. He would speak in the language Hartwell might finally understand, the language of mutual benefit, of practical solutions, of a future where no one had to lose everything. Whether Hartwell would listen was another question entirely. Outside, Running Elk sat by the fire keeping watch. His younger brother asked in Cheyenne whether he thought Ghost Who Listens would succeed. "He will try," Running Elk answered, "and trying with honor is its own kind of success. The white men will decide the rest," the fire crackled. The stars wheeled overhead, and in a grand ranch house on the hill, Vincent Hartwell also lay awake, staring at the ceiling, calculating odds and considering options. The game was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Morning came clear and cold, with frost silvering the grass. Ezra rose before dawn, washed in the basin Tom provided, and dressed carefully. He wore his cleanest clothes, still worn, still patched, but presentable. This meeting mattered too much for carelessness. Running Elk was already awake, feeding the fire. He handed Ezra a cup of coffee without speaking, understanding that some moments required silence rather than words. By the time the sun cleared the eastern mountains, half the town had gathered near Tom's forge. Word had spread about Ezra's planned visit to Hartwell's ranch, and people wanted to witness whatever came next. Sarah brought fresh bread. Miguel appeared with Ezra's mule groomed and ready. Tom handed him a walking stick, solid oak, useful for hiking or defending oneself. "Just in case," Tom said quietly. Colonel Garrett arrived with Judge Morrison. The judge carried a leather satchel stuffed with documents. "I've spent all night reviewing the papers," Morrison said, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "The land grant appears legitimate, but I found something else, the original town charter for Copper Ridge." He pulled out an aged document, carefully unfolded it on Tom's anvil. The town was founded in 1868 by a cooperative of miners and ranchers. The charter, written in both Spanish and English, explicitly states that water rights from Silver Creek would be held in common trust for all residents. Hartwell bought up individual properties over the years, but he never actually acquired the communal water rights. He just acted like he had, and no one challenged him. Sarah leaned in to examine the charter. "This means even without Ezra's claim, Hartwell's monopoly was illegal." "Arguably, yes. The charter would need to be tested in court, but it provides additional support for collective water rights." Morrison looked at Ezra. "You're holding better cards than you realize. Then why do I feel like I'm walking into a gunfight?" Ezra asked wryly. "Because you might be," Garrett said bluntly. "Take this." He held out a military-issue revolver. "I know you don't like guns, but take it anyway." Ezra accepted the weapon reluctantly, checking the chamber and then tucking it into his belt. He'd carried weapons during the war, but never comfortably. Violence had always been a failure of communication to him, a last resort when words failed. The walk to Hartwell's ranch took 20 minutes. Ezra went alone, despite multiple offers of company. This conversation needed to happen without an audience, without the pressure of witnesses forcing both men into rigid positions. But Running Elk and two of his companions shadowed him at a distance, visible enough to be noticed, but far enough back to avoid provocation. And Tom, Sarah, Miguel, and a growing crowd of townspeople followed. Stopping at the property line to wait, Ezra approached the ranch house steadily, noting the 4 armed ranch hands positioned strategically around the property. They watched him with hostile eyes, but made no move to stop him. Hartwell had agreed to the meeting. Ezra had sent word through Miguel at first light, though what that agreement meant remained to be seen. The rancher waited on his wide front porch, standing rather than sitting. He dressed in his finest clothes, a dark suit, polished boots, gold watch chain glinting. It was armor of a different sort, Ezra understood. "The uniform of wealth and respectability, Cole," Hartwell said coldly. "Come to gloat?" "Come to talk," Ezra replied, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. If you're willing, why would I talk to a man trying to destroy me? Because I'm not trying to destroy you. I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. Hartwell's laugh was bitter. Everyone. How noble. You want to play the hero, redistribute the water, make yourself the savior of Copper Ridge. And where does that leave me? Ruined, humiliated. That's up to you, Ezra said quietly. He brought something to show you. He reached carefully into his satchel, slowly, so the ranch hands wouldn't panic, and withdrew the town charter. Judge Morrison found this, the original founding document for Copper Ridge. He held it up so Hartwell could see the Spanish and English text, the official seals. It establishes communal water rights, which means even without my land grant, your monopoly was never legal. You built your empire on a foundation that was already cracked. Hartwell descended the steps and snatched the document, reading rapidly. His face paled as he absorbed the implications. This is a forgery. It's not. Morrison verified it. And there are 3 original copies, one in the Territorial Archive, one in the courthouse, and this one. You can't make them all disappear. The rancher's hands trembled slightly, crinkling the paper. When he looked up, there was something desperate and dangerous in his eyes. What do you want, money? I'll pay you to walk away. Name your price. I don't want money. Then what? Hartwell's voice cracked slightly. You've already taken everything else. Ezra met his eyes steadily. I want you to listen, really listen. Not to me as an enemy, but to a proposal that might save us both a lot of pain. For a long moment, Hartwell stared at him. Then slowly he nodded. Say what you came to say. And Ezra, drawing on 30 years of learning how to speak to people across cultures and conflicts, began to talk. Not in any foreign language, but in the most difficult language of all, the language of compromise, of mutual benefit, of finding common ground between opposing interests. The real negotiation had begun. They moved inside, away from watching eyes and listening ears. Hartwell's study was everything Ezra expected. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, a massive desk that spoke of power and control. But Ezra also noticed the family photographs on the wall, the worn Bible on the shelf, small hints that Hartwell was more than just the tyrant everyone saw. You have children? Ezra asked, gesturing to a photograph of 2 young people, a son and daughter. Both back east, haven't seen them in 5 years. Hartwell's voice carried unexpected pain. They left because they couldn't stand what I'd become. What had you become? This. Hartwell gestured at the opulent room, at his empire visible through the window. A man so consumed with building something that he forgot why he was building it. I told myself I was securing their future, giving them advantages I never had. But they didn't want advantages bought with other people's suffering. It was the first honest thing Ezra had heard Hartwell say, and it cracked open a door to real conversation. Here's what I'm proposing, Ezra said, settling into one of the leather chairs. We form a water cooperative. All the ranchers and farmers who depend on Silver Creek become members. The cooperative manages access fairly, charges reasonable fees for maintenance, and makes decisions democratically. And what do I get? Hartwell asked bitterly. The satisfaction of giving away everything I built. You get to keep your ranch. You get a voice in the cooperative, same as everyone else, not more but not less either. And you get something more valuable, a chance to rebuild your reputation, a chance to be remembered for fixing a broken system rather than perpetuating it. I'll be seen as weak, a man who lost everything, or a man who had the courage to change, to choose fairness over power. Ezra leaned forward. I've met a lot of powerful men, Hartwell. Some were tyrants to the end, and they died hated and unmourned. Others learned humility late, and they died respected. The difference wasn't in how much power they had, it was in what they chose to do with it when things changed. Hartwell paced to the window, staring out at his land. The silence stretched. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. My father was a sharecropper. Worked land he'd never owned for a man who treated him like property. I swore I'd never be powerless like that. I'd never depend on another man's mercy. So you made sure no one else had power, Ezra said, understanding the psychology. You became what you feared, I became successful. You became alone. Ezra gestured to the photographs. Your children left. The town fears you instead of respecting you. You have all this, he swept his hand around the lavish room, and who do you share it with? Who actually cares about you, not just your money? The words landed hard. Hartwell's shoulders sagged slightly. I can't just give up control, he said finally. Even if I wanted to, my pride, then don't give it up. Transform it! Ezra stood and approached the window, standing beside Hartwell. Use your organizational skills to help build the cooperative. Use your business knowledge to make it successful. Use your resources to help smaller ranchers improve their operations. Be a leader in the new system instead of a victim of it. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It'll be hard, and there will be people who never forgive you for the past. But it's possible, and it's better than the alternative. Years of legal battles, your reputation destroyed, your ranch potentially seized. This way, you get to shape what comes next. Hartwell turned to face him. Why are you offering me this? After what I did yesterday, the way I mocked you, tried to humiliate you, you should want revenge. Revenge is expensive, Ezra said simply. It costs time, energy, and peace of mind. I spent 20 years running from men who wanted revenge on me. I know what it does to people. I'd rather build something than destroy something. From his satchel, Ezra pulled out the letter from President Lincoln. He'd been saving it, knowing he might need one final piece of evidence to convince Hartwell of his sincerity. Read this. Hartwell took the letter carefully, his eyes widening as he recognized the signature. He read slowly, and when he finished, he looked at Ezra with something approaching awe. Lincoln wrote this to you 3 months before he died. He told me that after the war, the country would need people who could build bridges instead of walls, who could speak multiple languages, not just foreign ones, but the languages of different regions, different interests, different visions of the future. He said the hardest translation work would be between Americans who all spoke English but couldn't understand each other. And you think that's what we're doing here? Translation. I do. You speak the language of power and control. The small ranchers speak the language of survival and fairness. My job is to find the words that let both sides hear each other. Ezra paused. But I can't do it alone. I need you to try too. To listen to people you've been ignoring. To speak honestly instead of defensively. Hartwell set the letter down with reverent care. He walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a bottle of aged whiskey and 2 glasses. He poured for both of them, the amber liquid catching the light. To translation, he said, raising his glass. To understanding, Ezra replied, touching his glass to Hartwell's. They drank, and in that moment something shifted. Not forgiveness, that would take time if it came at all. Not friendship, the wounds were too fresh. But possibility. The possibility that enemies could become something else. That power could be shared instead of hoarded. That change could come through dialogue instead of destruction. I'll agree to the cooperative, Hartwell said finally. On 2 conditions. Name them. First, I want a seat on the governing board. Not as chairman, but as an equal member. I've made mistakes, but I still know this land and this business better than anyone. Agreed. Second condition. Help me write the letter to my children, explaining what happened here, what I'm trying to do differently. I don't know how to say it without sounding like I'm making excuses. Ezra smiled. I can help with that. I speak the language of fathers, trying to reconnect with their children. Learned it the hard way. They shook hands, not as friends, not yet, but as men who'd chosen a difficult path together. And when they walked out onto the porch together to face the waiting crowd, the sight of them standing side by side sent a ripple of shock and hope through the gathering. 3 months later, on a crisp December morning, Copper Ridge gathered for the official signing of the new water cooperative charter. The ceremony took place not at Hartwell's ranch, but at the center of town, in front of the general store, where everyone could witness and participate. The charter itself was a work of art and practicality in equal measure. Judge Morrison had overseen the legal framework, ensuring everything would hold up in territorial court. But Ezra had added something unique, opening phrases in all 12 languages he spoke, each one expressing the same sentiment. Water is life, and life belongs to all. The townspeople crowded close as Judge Morrison read the English version aloud. Then Ezra translated the opening into each language in turn. Russian, Arabic, German, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese, Italian, French, Cheyenne, and Lakota. Each phrase honored the diverse peoples who had taught him, who had shared their wisdom about community and fairness. Running Elk stood with several Cheyenne elders who'd come to witness the agreement. The inclusion of native languages in an official document was unprecedented in the territory, a small but significant acknowledgement that these lands had belonged to others before the settlers arrived. When the reading finished, the signing began. Hartwell stepped forward first, not by right of power, but by alphabetical order. His hand shook slightly as he signed his name, but he signed it clearly. One by one, the other ranchers and farmers followed. Sarah Mitchell, Tom Brennan, Miguel Rodriguez representing his family, Heinrich Müller, Mrs. Rossini. Even the Chinese railroad workers had been invited to sign, their names carefully transcribed in both Chinese characters and English transliteration. The cooperative charter divided Silver Creek's water rights equally among all landowners, with provisions for new members and democratic decision-making. It established reasonable fees for maintenance and improvement, with hardship exemptions for those who couldn't pay. It created a governing board of 7 members, elected annually, with term limits to prevent any single person from accumulating too much power. Hartwell had indeed secured a seat on the first board, but he'd been voted in by his peers rather than claiming it by right. He'd also donated significant funds to improve the irrigation system and had personally negotiated fair contracts with the railroad for Chinese workers. It didn't erase his past actions, but it was a start. Ezra had declined a board seat, preferring to remain an advisor rather than a decision-maker. His land grant had been officially recognized, but he'd immediately transferred the water rights to the cooperative, keeping only enough land for a small cabin and garden plot. He didn't need much. He never had. After the signing, Sarah hosted a celebration at her store. She'd been preparing for days, tables of food, cider and coffee, even a few musical instruments for those inclined to play. The atmosphere was jubilant, relief and hope mixing in equal measure. Ezra found himself surrounded by well-wishers, people who wanted to thank him or simply shake his hand. He accepted the attention graciously, but kept moving, uncomfortable with being treated as a hero. He was just a man who'd happened to have the right knowledge at the right time, he told people. Anyone would have done the same. That's not true, Sarah said, catching him as he tried to slip out for some air. Most people wouldn't have offered Hartwell a way out. They would have crushed him and enjoyed it. Crushing him wouldn't have helped anyone, Ezra replied. And it would have made me into something I don't want to be. What do you want to be? Ezra considered the question seriously. Useful, connected, someone who builds bridges instead of walls. That's all I've ever wanted, really. Sarah took his hand gently. You've done that. You've changed this town. Changed lives. My life. He looked at her, seeing the warmth in her eyes, and felt something stir in his chest. Hope for connection, for staying in one place, for building something more than temporary camps and fleeting friendships. I'm thinking about staying, he admitted. If that would be welcome. It would be very welcome. Sarah's smile was luminous. Tom joined them, clapping Ezra on the shoulder. About time you settled down. You've been running long enough. Maybe I have. Ezra looked around at the celebration, at the faces of people who'd become friends. Miguel teaching some children basic Spanish phrases. Rashid, the Moroccan merchant, now a regular trader in Copperidge, demonstrating Arabic calligraphy. The Tanaka family sharing Japanese tea customs. Running Elk and his companions explaining Cheyenne stories to fascinated listeners. The town had opened up in ways no one had anticipated. Ezra's demonstration hadn't just been about proving he could speak 12 languages. It had shown everyone that there was value in understanding different perspectives, different ways of seeing the world. The languages had become a bridge to broader thinking, greater empathy. Colonel Garrett appeared with 2 glasses of cider. To your health, Captain. "And to your future. I'm not a captain anymore," Ezra said, but he accepted the glass. "You'll always be a captain to me. The best officer I ever served with, and I served with plenty." Garrett raised his glass higher. "To Ezra Cole, the man who won a war with words instead of weapons." They drank to that. And as the celebration continued around them, Ezra felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 decades. Peace, not just the absence of conflict, but genuine peace. The knowledge that he belonged somewhere, that he'd done something meaningful, that the languages he'd spent a lifetime learning had finally served their highest purpose. As the sun set over Copper Ridge, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Ezra stood with Sarah on one side and Tom on the other, watching the town celebrate its new beginning. Miguel ran past with a group of children, all of them laughing and shouting in a mixture of languages. Running Elk caught Ezra's eye from across the square and nodded. A warrior's acknowledgement of a battle well fought. The mountain man, who'd ridden into town 3 months ago on a tired mule, had found what he'd been searching for all along, though he hadn't known he was searching. Not just a place to rest, but a place to matter. Not just survival, but purpose. He reached into his pocket and felt the worn leather journal there, the artifact that had started everything. Tonight, he'd make a new entry, not in any foreign language, but in simple English. Found home, found family, found peace. The languages brought me here, but the people made me stay. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything.